Becoming a photojournalist today requires more than just a passion for telling stories. With fewer staff positions available, you have to lead the life of a freelancer, which demands that you be proficient, both as a storyteller and a business person. Each self-initiated story has to be considered for its potential audience, its demands on your time, and its ability to earn you an income. You're keeping a lot of balls in the air. Allison Zaucha does that while telling stories that mean something to her. By considering the needs of both her nonprofit and editorial clients, she creates opportunities for herself that she might never receive if she were waiting by the phone, waiting for it to ring. She creates her own luck, her own opportunities.
So how I have been working with pitches has been I photograph it first, and then I form a package, and then I send it. Largely, I've started doing that because some stories would come about, and I was like, I can't wait for someone to approve it, or if I'm working with a new editor for the first time, they might not know my work or they might not know me. So just getting out there and making photos first and then talking with editors was how I worked with this project.
Managing time is a challenge for anyone with a freelance career, but especially so for a photographer who has to be present and in the moment to make the photographs. One has to make sure that the images being produced are making the most of the time allowed. For Allison, it's about having structure, even though she is working in a documentary tradition where the moments can be unexpected and unpredictable.
Well, for me, long form or like a short amount of time, either way, I make a shot list before I go in. That's really helpful for me. I had some help from Mary Vinolis, who's a freelance photo editor, and she was looking at some of my work years ago. And she was like, your strongest work is when you have a clear you clearly identify what the story is. And she was like, some of your weaker work is the ones where you're not sure what the story is.
We will talk to Allison about how she finds her stories through personal engagement and why the choice to earn a business rather than an art degree was the smartest decision she made for her career. This is Ibarian X, and welcome back to The Candid Frame. Do you have to do much traveling for the kind of work that you're doing, or you're mostly covering?
It's been local.
Okay.
In the Southern California area. So that's been good. That's been really great. I enjoy that because after I did that one project, Dreams That Could Be, that took so much fundraising and so much a year of pre-production to then do 3 weeks of travel and spending time, which felt like not a lot of time compared to all the back end stuff. And that was a while ago. That was in 2015. But after that, I was like, I want to be local. So I very much have enjoyed, and just moving out here a year and a half ago. Okay. It's been nice being able to understand the different neighborhoods and different communities in Los Angeles.
Well, tell me why you moved from the East Coast out to here to Los Angeles, which is not a non-competitive world in terms of photography. Why did you decide to come out here as opposed to, say, going to New York or to a smaller market?
Just to do it. So it was like a life move.
Oh, good for you.
My fiance and I were living in Annapolis, Maryland, outside D.C., so that was a really great photojournalism community as well out there. But being from the East Coast, this was kind of a perfect time in our lives of, we didn't have a house, we didn't have kids. We were like, now's a good time. So it was pretty much just a life move.
Yeah, I tell young people who are out here, should I move to New York? I go, yeah. You don't have to stay there.
Right.
But if you can, you want to be able to just make a major change like that while you can.
Right.
Before you have all the obligations of a mortgage and kids and
totally and
everything else.
Even visually, I feel and from a documentary standpoint, it's so great to live in just different communities and get to understand different neighborhoods and different areas of the country, of the world. I would love to live in Europe or something one day, but I don't see that happening as much as moving out here. People were like, wow, it's so far. And I was like, it's not that far.
How do you find it different in terms of finding the stories that you find for yourself, being in the Los Angeles area with it largely being unfamiliar to you, you're sort of learning it, as opposed to the East Coast where you were more comfortable and settled?
I would say it's the same process of just getting to know people and having conversations. I think the difference is that I've just been doing a little bit longer. So my approach has been much more talking to meeting or people at organizations, so nonprofits or just community organizations, and finding out what important stories in the community or neighborhood that they're seeing as being as the experts in that area or that social issue or whatever the organization is around, and then trying to kind of meet people and tell stories through that way.
Okay. So are you doing, because you're doing works with nonprofits, you're also working for publications, doing editorial work, getting commission work. So in the context that you just mentioned, are they also sort of the launching pad for stories that you're pitching to publications as well as trying to work with the organizations themselves? Yeah.
So lately, I've been working more so from that way of finding stories, and I have conversations with the organizations about what format works best. So whether that be the nonprofit commissioning me, or whether I think it might be a better opportunity for me to find stories photojournalistically and then pitch those and not get paid by the nonprofit. So it's a very much a conversation of what does this kind of relationship look like? And I very much enjoyed more of the editorial route in that way with the nonprofits of just meeting people and just them allowing me to show up and spend time with people and get to, just spend time. So that's been a really kind of a new format that I've been trying out of storytelling and how that all plays out. But I've enjoyed that a lot.
Can you give me an example of one of the nonprofits that you approached and then you realized that it was a good opportunity for you to pitch something editorially?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the one that came out not too long ago that was a lighter story was around the group of women skating in Venice.
Yeah, it's a fun one,
yeah. That group, they're not a big nonprofit, but they were very much a group that I was like, can I stick around and develop a story? I'm an independent photojournalist, so I'm not sure where this will land yet. This is my plan of pitching it to these types of publications. Would you be interested in letting me hang out? And make it clear that it's for that purpose. Right. So that worked out well. They've tried to hire me after that, but I kind of am never sure about that, and I proceed with caution just because once the story came out, I want to keep it in that kind of realm versus kind of mixing of the commission after and having it come out as an editorial piece.
How did you find out about them?
I think through a friend. A friend was friends with one of the founders, and then I was like, this seems really interesting, and I haven't really seen anything like that. And then with the rise of skateboarding going to the Olympics, I was like, this is kind of not that. It's very different, but it's still very interesting and something that's unique to, I think, Southern California specifically, and even different in the area.
Yeah. And for people who have not seen the story, it's and you can expand on this, but basically it's a group of middle-aged women who were, I guess, skaters themselves, who are teaching young kids how to skate and sort of navigate the culture.
Yeah, it's more of actually these girls women are in their mid-20s, late 20s, 30s, even learning to skateboard themselves within the past few years.
Oh, wow.
So it's not a community of women trying to compete competitively in skateboarding. It's more of creating acceptance for women who aren't big skateboarders to enjoy the sport, which is interesting.
And I saw that some of those things were being shot in Venice, so I can imagine that area is filled with testosterone. So I think that making a space like that safe and comfortable for girls who are interested in it but might be intimidated by all of that is great.
Right. And the visuals of it in the sense of the aesthetic of a lot of times when there's female skateboarders, I think often it's I used to skateboard when I was little, and I was my punk rock days and loved it, marched up to the half pipe, and the guy was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. But I think my aesthetic then was very punk, tomboy, grungier, more tomboy. But this group is trying to make the point of you don't have to be that. You can still be girly and still ride a skateboard and feminine and things like that. So it's been cool. I mean, they've inspired me to start skateboarding again and actually skate better.
I've got on a board for about 10 seconds. It was one of those boards where the wheels aren't fixed, where it's
geez.
wobbly.
That sounds terrifying.
I got on. It was Okay, that's enough. Because I used to skateboard when I was a kid, but it's been a long time. And
Yeah,
it was just that's not a good place to start again. How long did you work on that particular story before you were able to successfully sell it to somebody?
Similar to what we were saying before about trying to work on smaller pitches.
Yeah.
So that was a shorter time frame, and I gave myself like, okay, I've worked on one feature first, and then I did about one of the founders, and then so for that story, it was probably 4 or 5 times that I just met up with her in certain parts of her life, depending on if it was family or that was about her being a mother, and skateboarding and the intersection of that. So that was 4 or 5 times that I was with them. And then I pitched it after that, and it got picked up right away. And then the general feature about the group, which was picked up by ESPN, was 1 day coverage.
Oh, okay.
So I was trying to find ways that I could tell stories in shorter time frames, in addition to the longer format storytelling that I was doing on other stories.
So when you got the additional day after you had gotten the job, was it the pictures that you got subsequently, were they based on what the editor told you the story needed, or how did that work?
So how I have been working with pitches has been I photograph it first, and then I form a package, and then I send it. Largely, I started doing that because some stories would come about, and I was like, I can't wait for someone to approve it, or if I'm working with a new editor for the first time, they might not know my work, or they might not know me. So just getting out there and making photos first, and then talking with editors, it was how I worked with this project.
Tell me about the writing, because the photographs are great, but you still have to be able to sort of sell it when you're sending the email or the letter or whatever you're doing in terms of written form. So what's the kind of work that you have to put into that? Yeah,
I would say I actually wrote the piece for the general feature on the group, which was a little bit longer. I would say I don't love writing, but I can write. I usually try to keep it for like all of the pitches, because I work very much in this format of photographing first and then pitching and doing a little intro on a PDF and sending it out to people. I mean, in terms of like amount of writing that I do about like 400, 500 words. And also I'm always interviewing people anyway, just like informally of having conversation as I'm making photos and collecting just the information that will then inform the photos, but then also then goes into the body of, the pitch for whatever I'm sending out.
Yeah, because I would think that for an editor to have someone who can encapsulate the story beyond just the pictures, I think is probably an advantage over someone else who just sends, hey, I shot these things. I think it's a cool story. Be interested in your magazine. And what do you think?
Yeah, I also kind of like whether or not it's always a relationship too with the editor of like what their expectations are with the piece of like, oh, does this photographer just assume that it should be a photo essay? But I think when I'm sending it out, this is what I see as the story. These are an intro about the story, but I'm very much open to if like there should be a writer, a writer that is their job. They're probably 100% a much better writer than I am. Then I think that works, and it's a collaboration of the story. But yeah, I mean, I think, and I also spent a lot of time doing the research of like pre-research, pre-interviews of what the story is, and then also the research into how it affects like nationally or globally or whatever the issue is.
So do you already have a list of potential people in mind when you're saying, okay, I'm going to do this story on the skateboarders? And you mentioned that ESPN picked it up, but are you thinking about, okay, here's this list of publications that might be interested in it? And do you spend a good amount of time in terms of discerning who those are, and in terms of sending it out? Do you send it out, for example, do you send it out just to all of them at the same time? Do you send them one at a time? How does that work?
So it sounds so nerdy, but I have a spreadsheet and I list out all the stories that I'm working on. I'm usually working on around like 2 to 4 stories self-assigned at any given time, depending on, not photographing all at the same time, and they're at different stages. So I have a spreadsheet. It lists out what my stories are, who I want to pitch it to, where I think it would be a good fit, and then sort of like what stage it's at and who I've pitched it to already. So that just helps me keep all my thoughts together and visualize on the spreadsheet of like, who does this make sense to go to? And I pitch it out to one editor at a time. I usually give it a few days before I respond to them, or like a week to do a checkup, but I do a few days to send it to another editor if I haven't heard back, depending on how timely it is. If it's not pressing for time, if it's a feature that's not just hard-hitting news, that's happening like right away, then I'll give it a little bit more time.
Yeah. And it kind of makes sense that you're kind of reasonable in terms of how much time you spend on producing the initial photographs initially, because there's no guarantee that you're going to find a market for it.
Right.
So you don't want to spend all this time that you could dedicate to other photography that's more viable. But sometimes that can be heartbreaking.
It's a dance. Yeah, it's a dance of like, there's been some stories where I pitch out like after one day of photographing and just pitch out the idea with some images to show the concept a little bit and where I'm thinking. And then there's been other stories where I formed relationships with, like friendships with the people that I'm photographing. So, you know, I just kind of keep in touch with them and invest a little bit more time, even if I'm not sure where it's going to go. Because, you know, we've kind of had a good rapport or something like that.
Yeah. I saw on your website you had done stuff for Vanity Fair, Washington Post.
Yeah, for Washington Post, and some of that got picked up by Vanity Fair. Yeah.
Okay, but I saw that one of the newspapers is one in Sweden.
Yeah.
So okay, how does that work? How did that come about?
They found me through Blink.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was last fire season, and they saw that I was in the area, and so then they sent me out to cover the Woolsey fires for a few days.
You must have been surprised by that call.
Yeah. I had never heard of it before. They have one reporter that is in their U.S. correspondent who's in New York, and she flew out. And it was really great. It was a jump into, I mean, I had moved here not that long prior, and it was a jump into fire seasons and things like that. And it was really great working with the reporter because they were a great publication to work for, so we were able to find some features and also do general coverage and live. She was doing live reporting as I was filming, so that was a really good. I love when I can work with reporters in the field. Yeah,
and there's some serious demands in being able to photograph that kind of event.
I'm still learning. I mean, I was just covering it yesterday, actually, but both of those calls, when I got them, it was a little bit right after the initial night, you know, so like yesterday, the fire was happening at night. This was more of the aftermath. Even though it was still going on, we just couldn't get up into the canyons. Same with the other one. The other one last year was for Svenska Dagbladet. We were focusing on like the displacement of people and what was happening with their lives.
So before you became a photographer, you were interested in art, and you went to school initially for art, but then you had a conversation with someone that made you sort of rethink that. And
yeah,
tell me about that.
I didn't even get past the initiation for the art program, or the orientation, I guess you'd say. So I went to school at East Carolina University, and I was going to go for art. And in the orientation, the director was like, oh, you know, most of the art students graduate. It takes them 75% graduate in 5 years or something like that. And I was like, that's too long for me. I gotta go. And so I went to the business school, actually, and that has turned out to be really, really helpful, being a freelance photographer, but I didn't know it at the time. A semester in, doing my classes, I was really bored in the sense of accounting wasn't very thrilling to me. Finance was boring. And so I added an art minor. And that's where I had like really wonderful photo teachers and drawing teachers. And I joined the student newspaper as a photographer, and then became photo editor. So I always say like the student newspaper was my education of like being a photojournalist. Yeah. And then the business classes were really, really helpful for being my own business now.
If anyone asks me, should they go to photo school? I go, get a business degree. Photography is easier to learn than business.
Yeah, and it's your passion. I mean, my mom's an accountant, so I can say this. Like, I'm not very passionate about accounting.
But you learn what you need in order to be able to do what you love.
Right.
And it's really hard to do what you love and to kind of learn the other stuff.
Right. Because then it feels like a huge barrier to get there. So I definitely am very passionate about talking to people about doing a business program or doing a business minor, or like I want to, have a chance to go back and speak to college students in some format. I haven't figured it out yet, but just that the world's different now. If you go to a photo program and the teachers that I had, I think the world was very different when they were my age. They weren't coming out freelancing as so many people are now. So yeah, I think there's a real importance to, like you said, students getting a business degree, a business program, or whatever it is, internships.
So tell me after you finish school, because I know that you're doing work as a second shooter for a wedding photographer for a while. But at some point, you have to sort of make the leap. So tell me about that transition from doing something that was, relatively not sustainable, but
structured.
Yeah. Where you can have pretty much a good expectation of, especially if you're a second photographer.
Right. Loved it.
Right.
It's a great, so I pretty much, when I graduated from college, I immediately started doing, I actually did an internship first for a commercial agency that they represented photographers and other artists in New York. And I loved that because I kind of wanted to do it so I could understand how they were marketing for photographers so that I could do that for myself without having to have an agent, or I didn't know how that would, how that works. Obviously you have to build up work before you get repped. So that was really helpful in the terms of like, how do big photographers get their work out there? How do they get clients? And I was on big shoots and able to just get a little bit of understanding about that. And so after that was 6 months, I was second shooting for weddings, but also at the same time trying to figure out how to be a photojournalist. It was that last year of school that I realized that I wanted to jump into freelance. I won this regional North Carolina contest, and I was like, oh, I can do this a little bit. So that kind of gave me the confidence to say, okay, let me just jump right in. So second shooting for weddings, and also trying to go to workshops and conferences within the photojournalism realm, meeting people. I didn't really have that photojournalism community yet. So that was the launch. So working on self-assigned projects, that's where I also pitched and produced to Giveology, the nonprofit around Dreams That Could Be. So that project happened because I felt I want to work with nonprofits, or I want to work around social issues. How do I do that? Okay. So I just made the project.
So was the Missouri Photographic Workshop before that project?
That was after.
Yeah. Okay.
So Dreams That Could Be, that project kind of just happened because I wanted to start telling stories around social issues, and I didn't know how to go about doing that. Right. So I had volunteered with that nonprofit before, and I said, which was a nonprofit that reaches out to smaller organizations throughout the world and gets them kind of broadcast to the world and get more funding. But they work around education and students. And so I was like, why don't we do very personal narratives, stories for around the students? Really focus in on who they are. And they were like, great, let's do it. So I was like, okay, I thought it was going to be a little bit harder than that. But I made a pitch deck and I sent it all to them. And then, so that was my first kind of jump into storytelling.
But you had to do some crowdfunding in order for that. So tell us about.
Yeah. So that was a big jump. And
it's a huge leap.
Coming from that, I would probably recommend not doing that. Start a lot smaller. It was pretty ridiculous of me.
But I like stories where people dive into the deep end.
Really dived right in. So how to do crowdfunding. So we set up a website. I was working with a friend of mine who's a filmmaker, and we did a promotional video. We kept it all on the website, just instead of doing, one of the crowdfunding websites. We hosted a gala. We had, after the project, we did a gallery with the work, and I made a book, and we sold the book for the nonprofit and things like that. So yeah, it was about 6 months to a year of generating the money to be able to go over there, because the nonprofit was 100% volunteer run. So it was very much a labor of love on all parts.
But it's amazing that you really got a chance to sort of cut your teeth in a whole variety of different ways.
Yeah.
In terms of working with a nonprofit, organizing all of these things, procuring funding, putting together a book, an exhibit. I mean, that's a whole lot of stuff to be doing. Just doing one of those things can drive some people crazy. Doing them all simultaneously. Yeah, it was exactly as you said, cutting my teeth on this and figuring it out. But in this way, I was really granted some freedom because I was the visual storytelling expert in this situation, even though I was just starting out and I really was figuring it out. Because the nonprofit didn't have a marketing team or a visuals team, so it gave me the space to figure it out. And a big part of it was also, like we said, having those pre-interviews to figure out who wants to tell their story, who wants to be a part of the project, which with this project, we went to Benin, West Africa, and Chennai, India. And so we were having a lot of
Skype conversation, email conversations with the different nonprofits to figure out first what country were we going to, and then what students, one, wanted to be involved, and two, had interesting stories that they wanted to tell. So after that project and doing all of that work, that's when I was like, okay, that was a lot of the back end work. I really want to just kind of be able to spend more time with people.
Yeah. This interview and many others this season have been conducted in a studio which was once a garage full of junk. For years, I worked out of our second bedroom, but it wasn't until we built this space that I was finally able to invite people to come to me for interviews. It creates a wonderful dynamic for my conversations and helps ensure a consistent level of sound quality that I love and I hope you appreciate. Though I can't conduct every interview here, I'm very pleased when I can because I know how special the results will be. Your support has helped me to make many such investments over the years and continues to do so as we enter our 14th year of production. And you can help us to continue doing this work by supporting us financially by becoming a Patreon supporter and committing to a recurring donation of $5 or more a month. For less than what you would spend for a coffee and a muffin, you can help us to continue bringing you great content every week. If you haven't already, please visit patreon.com/thecandidframe and become a Patreon supporter today. Thanks to Head22449, David Mullen, and Michelle Elkins for their recent contributions. A little bit helps a whole lot. You can also support the show by writing a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And even better, if you really enjoy an episode, spread the word via an email to a friend, a post on your social networks, or word of mouth. It makes all the difference. So thank you for your support and being part of the TCF community. One of my favorite stories on your site is the Harlem Lacrosse team. The story's fantastic, but it's just some of the images there, especially the one of the kids on the subway car with all their lacrosse gear. I just thought that, oh my God, that is just so awesome. Tell us about that, how that story came about and your experience with it.
That's been an organization that I've kind of kept in touch with even out here. And I've been working on a story around one of the athletes out here. But I got connected with them through a friend of mine, and we were working on, it was a commercial project. And she knew my passion for social issues and working with nonprofits. And she's like, you have to meet my friend Joel, who works at Harlem Lacrosse. So we met up in New York a few years ago, and I documented one of their game days. So it was kind of a practice before and going out to the game and traveling with them. I just fell in love with their mission and their real impact and the students that, they work with. So this nonprofit, they embed into the schools. And so their coaches are kind of like a director at the school for the student athletes. So they kind of have this mentor, this, person looking out for them, this coach. And so I was just really impressed by that, having worked with different nonprofits and seeing different levels of impact. I thought this was a really good model. So I just kind of kept in touch with them, tried to identify certain stories. One of them didn't work out in the sense that, similar to what you were saying about the one family that you were working with, they didn't want to show their home. It was a little messy, similar situation. So it was like, I totally get it, understand. And we kind of pulled the plug on that narrative, but I still just wanted to spend time with them. So I worked with them in New York and Baltimore. And then when I moved out here, I reached out and was like, any stories, And so we've been working together again out here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Did that particular story, since it involves sports, help you in any way in terms of doing the story on the UCLA gymnastics team?
I somehow have just ended up in a lot of different sports stories, even though I'm not a sports photographer. And having conversations with some friends, I think what it comes down to is I'm really attracted to stories about community and strength and overcoming things.
Yeah.
And that is sports. You can find all of those things in sports. So it actually did help out with the UCLA gymnastics story. And that was really fun because they didn't want me to photograph who was winning or the actual event. They wanted me to photograph on features of some of the athletes. So that was great for me because I look for the quieter moments and the kind of like with Harlem Lacrosse, the subway. That's like not the game, but that's like one of my favorite pictures.
Did you find that because UCLA gymnastics teams is so much more high profile and that they're a lot more self-aware in terms of imagery and use of imagery, did that result in you having to work or to engage with people differently than people who are, who have no idea or concern about how they're being photographed?
So with them, no. Some other, I've had some other assignments where it has been that way, but very surprisingly, they were so open and involved, like very much just in their routine and living their lives. Even though it was like, they were focused for the event, and they were so open with us, and I could go anywhere, which I was so surprised about. Yeah. They at first were a little timid about me going into the locker room, which makes sense. But they were like, you know what, you can come in for like our little cheer or like their, pep rally before. Yeah. But I did so very much, like I was very much aware of them allowing me to do that, where that's not pretty normal. So I didn't stay too long. But for the rest of it, they let me everywhere, like right up next to them while they were competing.
And how much time did you spend for that story?
That was only a few hours. So that was just at, one of their competitions.
I feel that sometimes the pressure of 2 hours, I can manage much more easier than I can giving a really extended period of time. Because when I go in for a very short period of time, I know exactly what I need to get. So in your experience, when you go and you only have a limited amount of time, you have to have a diversity of imagery. So how do you work to make sure going in that you get what you need?
Well, for me, long form or like a short amount of time, either way, I make a shot list before I go in. That's really helpful for me. I had some help from Mary Vinolas, who's a freelance photo editor, and she was looking at some of my work like years ago. And she was like, your strongest work is when you have a clear you clearly identify what the story is. And she was like, some of your weaker work is the ones where you're not sure what the story is. So making that pre-shot list, even though it's documentary and I'm just going, I don't know what will happen, helps me get a variety of shots. And like I'll do a mood board before of very similar assignments and look, okay, like for that assignment, I looked up images of gymnastics event competitions and super, super close shots of their hands, and then going to the top of the gym and getting there super wide. So whenever I'm in an assignment, even if it's short, and I'm like feeling like, okay, I'm getting a lot of these medium shots. Like, what else do I need? I'll pull up my phone, look at my like shot list, and be like, oh yeah. And it helps focus me again. Because
that works for me, because with both of the personal projects that I'm doing right now, I don't have a shot list, but I have a mental note in my head of, I know what the story's about. So I'm always looking for moments that tie into those aspects of the story. So there could be a lot of other stuff happening, a lot of which repeats itself anyway.
Right.
So it's like, it's not necessary that I always get every moment as it happens. Because especially if it's about human interaction or in sports, it's like, it's going to happen again.
Right.
So it gives you a sort of grace in terms of if you miss it, you can get it again. But those other sort of critical moments are much more.
Yeah. And I think the pressure too of like with a short assignment though, and you're kind of in the intensity of the moment and you're feeling like the time's going really fast, or, like I can be really tough on myself in the middle of assignment, just be like, I'm not getting it. What do I need? And that list, or just having a visual list of like, okay, that helps just be like, break me out of those headspace and just be like, oh yeah, gets me back to what I need. Yeah.
Even though you don't have control of, say, the way it's laid out, do you sometimes are thinking, okay, what's going to be my opener?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think so when I was at the student newspaper, I was a photo editor for 2.5 years. So having that experience, I was managing at one point a team of 12 photographers, and I also did some layout design during some of that. So that really gives me a sense of like, that experience helps me think in the editor's shoes, because they need their deadlines. They need a variety of images. If it's going to be a thumbnail, it needs to be probably a closer shot versus a wide shot. So I'm definitely thinking about that, and that's always in the back of my head.
Oh, I'm so grateful that I had that experience myself, because it just gave me, it taught me the importance that not every picture has to be Pulitzer quality of photographs, and it's not going to happen anyway. Because sometimes some images that don't stand alone don't stand out.
Right.
When juxtaposed next to another image, all of a sudden there's a resonance that exists between the two images, and it furthers the story.
Right.
So as long as the content's there, it really doesn't matter whether it's perfectly composed or had the best light. But if you're missing that picture, it is really hard to.
And I think starting from like the storytelling viewpoint anyway, for me, it's not just about the one picture. For me, it's always about like this sequence of photos, you know.
Tell me about the story that you did for the Missouri Photographic Workshop, which is intense. Because for those of you who don't know, the Missouri Photographic Workshop has been going on for over 50 years.
I think it's over 70.
70 maybe? Yeah, it's a long time. And basically they have young photojournalists from all over the country, sometimes from all over the world. And you go and visit a small town in Missouri, and you go and find a story, and you work on it for several days with the help of two editors who have a lot of experience. But the thing is, you're basically dropped in with barely a parachute. This is basically, okay, you're here, go out and find a story. And you found a great story with Kim, her name. And tell us about her and how that all came about and how you gained access. Because as you'll see when you guys visit the website, she's faced some challenges, and she has a lot of stuff going on. And getting her trust to open up her life to your camera was an amazing thing, especially considering the circumstances under which you were working.
Yeah. Like you said, Missouri Photo Workshop, you kind of get dropped in, very intense week. And like just, you're only allowed to photograph with 400 frames, and they check. You're not allowed to delete, which was a really, really amazing experience. I think everybody should do it because it's really hard. And my coaches were Bill Maher and Peggy Peedy, and so they were really, just really amazing. And so we all the students stay at like this one inn that's like pretty close to in this specific town. And so Kim she was taking care of the inn that we were all staying at.
Oh.
Once we, got into the workshop and we were like getting settled after like registering when we got there and getting all settled, and they're like, all right, go find your stories. I was like running around town, meeting different people, meeting like doctors, and like asking people what stories they thought, were interesting about the town, or people that were characters that they thought should have their story told. And so I was like dropping something off at my room, and then I was coming out and I noticed like this little boy playing with his mom. And so I grew up with a single mom, so I'm very much like a really strong mom, me and her growing up. So I'm very much like drawn to like strong mom stories anyway. So I saw this little boy playing, and I was like, that's interesting, because he's not in school. He's with his mom while she works. So wonder what is going on. So I just like knocked on the door and just started talking. And it was probably like a 5 to 10 minute conversation, and we got deep into it pretty quick. And with Missouri, I was kind of framing, like my initial kind of conversations with people was like, aren't we crazy? Like there's like 40 of us running around town. I'm sure you've seen us. So yeah, it was a pretty quick conversation, but we got deep really fast. I also share a lot about myself when I'm asking people to open up about them. Yeah. And so I relate as well and open up. And I think that helps people feel like I'm not putting a spotlight on them. And so I told her, I was like, okay, well, I have to run back, and I would love to talk more with you about doing your story if you're interested in telling your story, if you want to. And I think giving people that trust of you don't have to do this makes them feel not like taken advantage of or something like that. And so I went back and because with Missouri Photo Workshop, you have to kind of pitch your editors. Yeah. Sometimes it's like the fourth story that you give them that gets approved. Not everyone does. They gave me the green light. And so I went right back to Kim after that. And we had about a 4-hour conversation that afternoon in the park, just kind of going into what she was going through. She had lost her child, and it was about to be the anniversary of that passing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I'm rambling now. No,
you're not rambling at all. No, that's because you see the diversity of imagery that you get in terms of her visiting the grave of the child that she lost, when she's working, when she's in the car with the kids. I mean, it's like I think it's about 3 days or maybe 4 days of shooting.
I think we had like 3 to
something like that. But you got a lot of stuff because you are spending as much time as you possibly can going there, and then going to the editors, showing them the work that you've done, then getting feedback, and then you having to go back out there.
So one of the I think everyone when they do that workshop has like this like breaking point. You're like, oh my God, I cried in my car. I also would recommend people renting a car so you can like have a little bit of alone space for like a few seconds. So we could only photograph 400 frames. And the first day I was just like making way too many pictures of just like them playing in the park, which I don't even think end up in the final, set. And so by the time we had to get to going to the grave, that was a very important moment. And I had literally 25 images left. And Bill was freaking out. And I was like, all right, obviously I needed to learn how to do this because I'm overshooting a lot. And so I think I made like 15 images there. And I was forcing myself to just hold back a little bit, which was really challenging. And then some of my favorite images at the end when they're going to bed, and like I had like 10 pictures to take left. And I was just like, I need to force myself to wait.
I did one on a guy probably in his 70s that was a Meals on Wheels driver. And so his routine was fairly fixed. He would go in the morning, pick up the meals, and then drive them. So it was always the same places, the same locations. There wasn't diversity of stuff there. But the more interesting images for me were when he was back at his house where he would spend most of his day. And his daughter had moved in, so his 2 granddaughters were in there. So that dynamic was really kind of interesting. And he had been a widower, I don't know for how many years. But the day before the last day, just in passing, he mentions he has a girlfriend. And I'm like, what? And when I tell my editors, they're going, there was some event happening that night, and he was going to visit his girlfriend. I said, you're going over there. I said, of course I'm going over there. Yeah. And it was just this nice platonic relationship, and they would just sit there on the couch talking to each other. And I made an okay image. My editor pointed out how I could have been a better image.
Yeah.
Of course.
Of course.
But it still was just like there are always those things that you just, when you realize this has to be in there. And that is one of the most exciting things. Yeah. But also one of the most crazy making things too, because it's just like, I have to get this.
Right.
And if you miss it, you're just like,
well, I spent a lot of time, and with Kim specifically, we had like a 4-hour conversation even after. So I kind of like a pre-interview of before the story happened. And with all stories, I do this, but specifically with sensitive stories, I spend a lot of time explaining what my ideas are for the project, where I see it going, if it's going to go anywhere, not with Missouri Photo Workshop, that was for the workshop, but so that they feel very much like they understand what's happening too in the process, because it is such a strange thing to just come into someone's lives. So I tried to explain like very much like the whole entire process. And then for Kim, like I said, I asked so many questions when I'm telling someone's story. So I think for her, it was a little bit therapeutic of a process, because I think it might have been like some of the first times that people were asking so many questions or cared to ask or spend that much time in listening to her story and kind of everything that she's had to overcome. So, and there's a lot of things that aren't in the story that I couldn't put in, or I didn't feel it would be right to put in. Yeah, I think like just spending that time really is huge.
For that kind of work, it's for me, one of the big lessons has been that in terms of the tools that you have, your ears are much more important than your camera. It's your ability to be able to listen and make the person the priority rather than just the images that allows you to do what you need to do as a photographer. If you're fixated completely on your imagery, and basically if you're just concerned about what you need and what you want, you're going to miss a whole lot. Technically, you may make some really competent, effective photographs. Right. But you're going to be missing the mark in a big way. Yeah.
And we had that conversation of, I was like, if there's anything that you feel uncomfortable with, if you feel that like I need to put my camera down, let me know, because I'm happy to do that. Because I think that's more important, like you said, than just getting that extra photo, where if you're spending this much time with people, there's going to be a lot of moments
Yeah, for this project that I'm working on with my mother-in-law, she first moved into us because she had a crisis, and she was slurring her words that night, and my wife thought she might be having a stroke. So we called the 911 and the ambulance, and the firemen came, and I was sitting there with her, trying to keep her attention. She was throwing up, and I was there. And then at some moment, all the firemen were there in the kitchen, and I'm like taking a step back, and I'm at the table with her.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, there's a picture here.
Right.
I didn't take it.
Right.
I didn't take it. Part of it was because I was hearing my wife in a panic in the other room.
Right.
Because we didn't know exactly what was happening. It ended up being just a urinary tract infection that she's had before, and that caused the sort of lupus. But we didn't know that at that moment.
Right.
And I just decided at that moment not to take the picture. And later on, I thought about, man, it would have been an important part of this story. But, part of me as a husband and son-in-law, it was just like, I need to be present for her right now.
Totally.
And the picture has to be secondary. And then the photojournalist in me is going, because I know if a real editor was there, you should have taken a damn picture. Yeah. But sometimes you get to a moment where you really have to make a choice, and sometimes they're not easy to make.
Yeah. And I think too, you can never forget about the relationships, even though as a photojournalist, you're documenting what's happening. Mm-hmm. But even if you just met people for the first time, there's still that relationship and that trust and that human person. Yeah. It's not just the photo, it's their lives.
Yeah.
So,
and I think people recognize those moments when you choose not to make the photograph when you could.
Right.
And I think that to some degree, even if they're not photo savvy, that they nevertheless recognize and appreciate when you do that. It may be not what a quote unquote true photojournalist will do, but you're a human being first, and it's about the relationships you've created and hopefully can sustain. That's really important.
Yeah. And I think
it's just a picture.
Right. I got into this to really help empower people and be able to listen to people. The camera is the tool that brings those relationships to happen. Mm-hmm. I have to, follow the person, let them lead. They're inviting me into their lives. So, I'm following suit. And if it's not okay with them, then I hear them, One of the things, I was a member of WPAO. I mean, I still am technically, but I don't live in DC. So,
Which is?
Women Photojournalists of Washington, DC. And we had a meetup one time, and I remember Daniela Zalkman was talking about her project around Indigenous people and the beautiful portraits that she's done. Mm-hmm. And she made a comment about, it was a few years ago, so this is not direct, but just made a comment about how when she originally started photographing the project, it was very documentary, and then she kind of was thinking about ways of portraying the story, and how would she want her own mom portrayed if it was on the cover of a magazine. And if you're photographing a survivor or someone who's really had a traumatic experience, maybe going through addiction or something that is a mental health problem or issue or crisis, how would you portray them? And so I thought about that a lot with Kim, and and if it was my own mom, how do we portray people when they're in vulnerable situations and they're inviting you into their lives? And I see a lot of strength in so many people. It doesn't matter, what's going on. And I saw a lot of strength in Kim. So I really wanted to focus in on that. So I think that always kind of sticks in the back of my head.
And that comes across in those imageries in that project. And I know that in the hands of someone else less sensitive, that she could have been portrayed in a much harsher way. And
yeah.
So kudos to you for having that sensitivity. And like you said, you were raised by a single mother. So I think that those experiences really are important to remember and to use as we decide what stories we're going to tell and how we're going to tell them.
Yeah, and I think having conversations like this, and I think right now, or at least I'm having a lot of those conversations of when you're sharing work before it goes anywhere, and asking these sensitive questions, and kind of looking internally and being well, why am I the one telling this story, and asking those really hard questions of ourselves. Yeah,
because regardless of race, race and who. And, what kind of photographers documenting the lives of people of color, I think that as photographers, as a class, we're a very privileged class.
Yeah.
And yes, race and sex and all of that comes into it. But I think it's really important to be aware that as photographers who have a degree of power to be able to tell the stories of people who are to some degree less powerful is really an important responsibility.
Absolutely.
And you can't be so self-obsessed about your career, your portfolio, and your all that other stuff and be blind to that, because
Right.
I think there's too much work that's out there that does a disservice not only to the to the craft and the work, but also to those people in the community, because that stuff does long lasting damage. Maybe not to that person, but to that perception of people that are like that.
Well, and we're also fragile, like if you're working on, like, the people are all fragile as humans in general, but if you're going into communities and wanting to tell stories, I mean, I think sensitivity is like the first thing, the most important thing, to really respect people, respect their lives and their homes, and because it's not your life, like no matter what, you're coming into someone else's life. So that's huge. And I think spending that time figuring out what people want to say, because even though you're not showing them the pictures, in that way, it's a collaborative process because they're allowing you to be there.
Yeah, because I think about the level of trust I would have to invite some stranger into my house.
Right.
And to hang out and photograph me, sitting on my couch.
Right. Or if you're, when you're going to the hospital, having a stranger there documenting you going to the hospital, or, not in our brightest moments, but that's the moments that photojournalists want to get into.
That's the good stuff.
That's a huge vulnerability that people are allowing us to do.
Yeah. And I'm grateful that people do, because those are some amazing stories, and they can do so much for so many people when they have a chance to see them.
And absolutely. And if you aren't on a deadline, if it is a passion project or a self-assigned story or whatever it is, taking that time, I think, is invaluable.
Yeah.
Or not feeling like I need to get this out right away and it's about the story, but it's really about the people.
Yeah. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore, and it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
I was really thinking about this question since you since you asked me. Can I do two?
Okay. I'm
sorry. I'm breaking the rules. Okay. Well, I also looked through the list because there's a few people that you've already interviewed that I didn't want to repeat. So that's a very important question, which is the first is Phillip Montgomery. I love his work. He does just these really powerful black and white documentary storytelling and also portraits. Recently, he did some portraits for The New Yorker, which were really powerful. And then the second is a friend of mine, September Dawn Bottoms. She used to live here in LA, and then she just moved to Oklahoma, and she's making some really powerful work around her family and around the community. And definitely.
That's great.
Definitely check her out.
Well, thank you so much for coming up.
Thank you so much. This is a huge honor. I appreciate it.
Thanks to Allison for sitting down with me. Find out more about her and her work by visiting AllisonZaucha.com. I also have 2 upcoming workshops, the first in Los Angeles in November at the Los Angeles Center of Photography, and in Tokyo, Japan in December. You can find out more by visiting nobechicreatives.com for my workshop in Tokyo and lacpphoto.org for my workshop in Los Angeles. And check out our YouTube channel where I offer comments on photography submitted by TCF listeners who contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr pool. Check out the TCF Flickr pool and our YouTube channel by clicking on the links in the show notes and the website. My latest book, Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow, is now available. You can purchase it today and receive 40% off the list price when you order it from the Rocky Nook website. Use the promo code Pirello40 at checkout to take advantage of the discount. And receive 3 free copies of my previously published ebooks by signing up for the Candid Frame mailing list, where I share thoughts about life, photography, and keep you updated on TCF events. And remember, you can support the show by contributing to our Patreon effort or donating through PayPal. Not all episodes may be available on your podcaster of choice, so download, listen, and share any and all episodes of The Candid Frame by downloading the TCF app, available for both Apple iOS and Android. And because of your support, it's free. The Candid Frame's audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker, and our music is from Kevin MacLeod, whose royalty-free music can be found at incompetech.com. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.